All right, Scott. Well, let's turn and talk about the Biden policy towards Russia, where I guess there's been two flare-ups in between a period of some calm, like in the early year, April. Really, they were all worried that Putin was about to invade Ukraine, and he had built up over 100,000 troops there, and everything like that. And then, the like kind of forget about it, and that de-escalates. And then, starting what late October, November this year, we essentially had the same thing, except nobody's really reporting on the fact that Russia actually has less troops, even claimed by the U.S. intelligence forces on the quote unquote border with Ukraine than they did in April. But
Right.
nonetheless, this has led to a pretty major, I don't know, cycle of escalation between the two sides. And Putin has now, I think, made some pretty serious demands of Biden. And well, I don't know what you think's going to happen, and how you think Biden's done on the Russia policy front.
Well, so far, I mean, he talks tough in public and then he backs down in private has been the method, which is fine with me. You know what I mean? By all means, beat your chest on CNN as long as the phone call with Putin is, look, buddy, we understand each other, right? And if that's the case, then I'll settle for that. I prefer that they just get along, but you know, I won't say Biden's smart enough, but he's experienced enough to know the role of Ukraine in East-West relations here and how tricky this could be and how dangerous this could be. And I think that, you know, he's certainly pushed his luck. But then again, I think that he blinked once Putin called his bluff, right? As of the time we're recording this, it would have been, what, 3 or 4 weeks ago now, that he announced that, actually, no, we won't be inviting Ukraine into NATO for the next 10 years, over the next decade, which is indefinitely,
Yep.
essentially. And then he was asked at a press conference, well, if Russia does invade, will you supply troops? And he said, no, we will not do that. Our commitment to NATO is one thing. Ukraine's not a member of NATO, so no, we won't. And that's severe climbing down. So then Blinken says today, for example, oh, yeah, well, there'll be serious consequences. Okay, well, whatever. Your president already said that, no, there won't be. And, and I guess they did say, if Russia did invade Ukraine, they would level this massive sanctions regime on Russia. But then Russia responded to that. We don't care about that. We're ready to go ahead and, completely abandon SWIFT and completely turn to the East. You want to treat us that badly? We'll just, deal with Iran and China and India and whoever over here on this side of Asia and leave you guys to your own devices. In other words, neutralizing that threat, right? Like, we've already prepared for this eventuality. So what good does it do America to push Russia east away from Europe and towards China? I mean, I can't say I'm too worried about it, but it's certainly, I would prefer to see. In fact, I think Russia's probably a great bridge between civilizations in a way, right? Like, they're Christian, but they're Eastern Orthodox, right? And they're, so they're great, and they're, a huge part of their landmass are Asiatic peoples and whatever. We're not
Right.
Slavs and not white-skinned Europeans, but are Russians. And so, I don't know. It seems like if you had a society where the people in charge were just kind of trying to look out for what's good for the good old USA and the people of it over the medium to long term here, then they would be looking at Russia as a friend and as a country where our only priority is to figure out all the best ways that we can be friendly with them and work together with them. I was joking with Ray McGovern on the show about, you might remember this, when Russia seized the Crimean Peninsula after the coup of 2014, which Biden was involved in as vice president, that Andrew Coburn had a friend who was at a cocktail party with a bunch of military industrial complex guys in Crystal City outside of Washington, D.C., which is like the big military industrial complex neighborhood or whatever, one of them. And he said they were all laughing and joking and another round of drinks all around for everyone. And isn't this great news that Russia seized the Crimean Peninsula? Now, again, to me, I don't care if they do or not, but what's the point here? The point here is, great, more tension. Great. the coup backfired. Instead of getting away with it, we've got consequences. Okay, that's fine too. We'll just build up a new, better Black Sea fleet, and we'll just have more exercises in the north. I bet we'll get a whole new aircraft carrier through Congress based on this alone.
Mm-hmm.
And to them, this is great. But just think about, as my friend Adam says, it's the flea wagging the dog here. Where you have this tiny group of people with the most narrow interests that you could imagine, cashing dividend checks from getting naval ships built, right? That's 1/100th of a percent of the population of this country or less are directly benefiting from that, but they benefit directly from increased tensions between the USA and Russia, the two greatest thermonuclear armed powers in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're like, the average guy might think that the people in charge of the policy aren't really thinking about that. Who's going to make a lot of money off of selling weapons?
Yep.
That they would have higher interests in mind. They don't.
Yeah.
That's all they are, man. And so they're willing to, anyway, I'm sorry to answer your question. I think I'm grateful that Biden is backing down. And I think, they have talks coming up here, and I expect Putin to play his cards very well. And I honestly, man, I think my biggest fear is that Biden will not be up to the challenge of the talks. And you hear this from right wingers, and whatever hawks, saying that, I should specify Republican hawks and people like that, attacking him and saying, yeah, he's going to give away the whole store, right? The way that the liberals attacked Trump for meeting with Kim. Oh, he's going to lay down and capitulate and give everything over to the enemy and all this kind of stuff. Well, I'm not really worried about that. I'm worried that because he'll be unable to deal with Putin on Putin's level, because he'll space out so much and get, tired, easy, and all those kinds of things, that he'll just be extra stubborn. That he'll be, just like Trump in Hanoi, right? He'll be so overly cautious of being generous and doing the right thing that he won't. He'll refuse to back down and be smart. When the obvious play here is obvious to anybody who doesn't have a dog in the fight, which is for the Americans to just back the hell off. For them to encourage their Ukrainian friends to declare neutrality and friendship with both sides, right? Not isolation from both sides, but friendship with both sides. And, on one hand, recognize stronger autonomy for the Donbass region, like in the deal at Minsk II, while at the same time, trying to apologize and offer forgiveness and try to figure out a way to, end the hard feelings from that kind of thing and reintegrate the Donbass into the rest of the country. If they'll, what's going to take for them to get back together again. In other words, obviously every faction here should be determined to find where the areas of tension are and cut them off and cool them off. It's clear that Russia doesn't want to expand their territory. Putin could have taken the Donbass region in 2015 without even moving any troops. All he had to do was draw a line with a black magic marker. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to think that now he wants to march to the river and seize, Azov or certainly not Odessa. I mean, I don't know. If they really pushed him, I guess he could. But I don't think there's any reason to believe that that's what Putin really has in mind here, is he wants to seize the eastern half of that country. There's no real reason to believe that. Again, in 2015, the people of the East voted on a plebiscite, not the entire East, but the Donbass region, the far East, voted to join the Russian Federation. He told them no. And that was in the worst of the fighting. He absolutely could have sent a couple of army divisions in there and just said, okay, this is our territory, the same way he did in Crimea. And that would have been the end of that, essentially. He didn't do that then. So I think it's pretty clear that what's going on now is that the Americans have been hawking it up. They've been increasing all of their, provocative moves in the Baltic and Black Seas and the Oshtok Seas with their bomber flights up to the 12-mile demarcation point and sailing all their battleships into the Black Sea all the time and all that kind of thing. And then I'm sorry. I think Ray was. I was talking with Ray McGovern. I'm pretty sure he was quoting from Putin's speech, where he was claiming his own reasons to believe. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, Kaba. I don't think there's any reason to believe, like public reason to believe, that they were planning on putting in the anti-missile missiles into Ukraine the way they have Poland. And these are the missile launchers, the Mk-41 missile launcher, which can also be a dual-use item that you can fire a nuclear-tipped Tomahawk cruise missile from. And so, that's the real concern that the Russians have about the Americans putting these launch tubes in Poland. Now, as far as I know, there's no open source public reason to believe that they had a plan to do this in Ukraine as well. But I could be wrong about that, but that's as far as I know. But
that's kind of what I've gotten to, that I haven't seen any real reason. But Putin, in a speech or in a comment related to when he announced like his list of demands, or what the security guarantees that Russia was asking for, he made a statement about being concerned about advanced NATO weaponry being moved into Ukraine. And I kind of read that as, they're worried about the Patriot missiles, but I didn't see specifically Putin claim that or any specific claims about what weapons they're talking about.
I see. Well, that wasn't in like the list of demands that we want assurances that you're not going to put the anti-ballistic missile systems into Ukraine.
I don't remember that being specific in there, or at least specific to Ukraine, I guess. Okay. I think maybe Eastern Europe was the demand.
Yeah. So I guess that was what Ray was saying with it. Yeah, he implied that he knew that this was going on, even though it hadn't been published anywhere yet. But, yeah. I mean, and I'm not sure I buy that. It would certainly be a huge escalation on Biden's part if he was just going to install those and then announce that they were there. It'd be a huge provocation to do that. Mm-hmm. But, anyway, I think, earlier, the way you said it, you kind of had air quotes, kind of like scare quotes around building up near the border, which I think is, probably appropriate, because from what I'd read, a lot of this buildup, such as it was, which apparently was never as big as the Washington Post had claimed, but this was taking place 200 miles from the border. But 200 miles is pretty far. I mean, that's from Austin to Dallas. That's 3.5 hour drive, on Texas freeways, speeding. So, that's not exactly a buildup right on the border. Now, it could be that if you're a real analyst and you're looking at exactly what they had arrayed there, that really was looking like an invasion force or not. I wouldn't take their word for it, but I guess that's possible. But I don't think that, I guess I should say, the way that I look at that is essentially a threat that, you've made us mad. Now we want assurances that you're not going to go further. Mm-hmm. And so we're threatening that. And the same kind of thing that you see with Taiwan. Whenever the Chinese build up, they say, oh, see, they're threatening to invade Taiwan. It's like, well, kind of, but what's the threat? The threat is if Taiwan declares independence, we're going to invade them. So don't declare independence, right? So I'm not saying that's okay or wonderful or anything, but I'm just saying the context there is not China's just preparing to invade Taiwan. It's that China, fears or seems to fear, whether for good reason or not, that the Taiwanese are about to do something provocative, and they're telling them, don't do the provocative thing and provoke me. So, I think that's what you have here too, in the case of Russia. So, the Americans, I think they really do a lot of the time, Kyle. I mean, I know you've read enough foreignpolicy.com in your life and enough Foreign Affairs magazine. These people really do believe their own BS a lot of the time, that they just cannot, get their head around the idea that maybe they're the one who did the thing that caused the problem, that they're the provocative ones, that the other side might see a reason to believe that they're the ones being defensive in the face of our aggression. And they just can't. They just don't have the imagination to see. They look at Vladimir Putin and they go, look at how evil that guy is. Remember that time he burned our flag and called us the great Satan or whatever, right? It's an emotional reaction.
Right.
And I mean, you got to admit, the guy's pretty gangster. the way he carries himself is like, if you were a State Department guy, if you were a State Department weenie, you would be afraid of him. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, but then, I think that means that they never say, well, as long as we're just drinking tonight and talking amongst ourselves, we really maybe shouldn't have done that coup back in 2014 that helped to precipitate this whole crisis. In that case, Crimea would still belong to Ukraine. The Donbass region would still belong, would also be under the jurisdiction of Kiev. It wouldn't be this mess. Maybe we could have tried better, differently later, something. But boy, that really didn't work out. Nah, they won't ever talk like that. They'll never admit that.
Yeah.
That this is their doing. And so then what's the other answer? The other answer was that evil Vladimir Putin. He's the return of Stalin. He's the return of the Tsar. He wants to conquer Eastern Europe. His mindless, mad aggression must be checked. I just saw Ann Applebaum from the Washington Post tweeted that he knows that everything we're doing is defensive. He knows that NATO is a defensive alliance. He knows that he's the guilty aggressor and we are only the defensive ones reining him in. So don't give me this crap about how Putin might look at it, that we are expanding NATO into his sphere. We're just defending the world from him, and he knows that. Whatever. And it's just like, dude, you know what? I don't think so. Yep. I don't think that that's right at all. If you look at, Oliver Stone's interviews with him, he's like, Oliver Stone, what am I supposed to do? Oliver Stone says, come on, Mr. Putin, you got to recognize this is just a racket. These guys are selling weapons to the Pentagon and making a lot of money by pretending that you're a threat. And he says, yeah, but you're surrounding my country with anti-ballistic missiles. So what am I supposed to do, Oliver Stone? Like, not respond to this? Right? And then, by the way, so what happened? About a year after that interview was when Putin announced he's got a brand new, heavy, multi-intercontinental ballistic missile reentry vehicle rocket that can launch, 24 warheads plus its dummies, that can kill all of Texas with one rocket, every major city in Texas with one rocket. And he's got another one that's going to go around the South Pole where we got no defenses whatsoever. He's got another one that's a nuclear-powered cruise missile that essentially has unlimited range and can evade, go all the way around any American defenses to, go around the back way to hit any target that they want in the continental United States. He's got a nuclear torpedo that now he can use to set off a nuke in the middle of San Francisco Bay, Chesapeake Bay, and, put those cities completely out of business for generations. What am I missing? Oh, and then the hypersonics.
Yep.
And he says, and in his giant speech in 2018, where he debuted all of his new nuclear technology, or at least made all of his claims, he said, you know why I'm doing this, right? George Bush got out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty and started putting anti-missile missiles all around my country. So what am I supposed to do, man? Not make hypersonic missiles? Not make nuclear-powered cruise missiles that have the range to evade your defenses? No. That's my job. I'm the head of state around here. And it's like, you know what? For a raving psychopath, he seems pretty reasonable in his creation of hydrogen bomb torpedoes. You know what I mean? Who put him in that position to act in such an insane manner? It's George Bush and Dick Cheney did it. And John Bolton. And they did it. Why? Because it was a racket. So they could sell a bunch of tech that doesn't even work. Right? This anti-ballistic missile tech. And, I have it on good authority. The only real way to take out incoming ICBMs over the North Pole is with H-bombs. All this shoot a bullet with a bullet stuff doesn't work. You need essentially neutron bombs in space, enhanced radiation devices in space that knock out all the electronics on the incoming ICBMs. That's the only way to do it. Everything else is a bunch of crap. Everything else, and that's a boondoggle too. But everything else is just in fact, I did meet a guy who said he was an engineer on those projects. Said, no, you can shoot down a missile with a missile, but the question is, how much are you willing to pay per missile, man? Because for an extremely high price, I can shoot down some missiles for you, but we're talking about 1 or 2 from North Korea. We're not talking about thousands coming over the poles from Russia,
Right.
you know, or even hundreds. So, you know, I'm telling you, man, you hear me talk about the Middle East this way all the time, Kyle, but, you know, America's relationship with Russia, too, it just didn't have to be this way at all. This is all because of Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and for that matter, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They've just done nothing but make this thing worse and worse, and for no good reason whatsoever, man. No good reason at all. You know, on September 11th, Putin was the first one to call the White House and say, I'm at your service. You need help invading Afghanistan? You can use my bases in Kazakhstan. Go get them SOBs, man. And you know, you could crack a joke there about how, yeah, he was just giving us our own Vietnam and all that, but nah, not really. I think he expected for the Americans to go in there and hunt some Arabs and get the job done, not let them all go and then turn to Iraq. And so, you know, I'm not saying he's a great guy. He's the head of state, and probably more ruthless than many, but they talk about him like he's Hitler, and he ain't Hitler. You know, he's Hindenburg, right? He's should be easy to deal with.
So, yeah, I guess last question here. I'm just going to kind of present, I guess, a more pessimistic case on Russia, where, you know, you compare it to the Middle East, like Iran, the Biden administration doesn't seem to understand the Russian position on Ukraine still. You know, they're worried, and they, like you said, they actually believe their own BS. They really think that Putin wants to take Ukraine. And honestly, the reaction should be, if you want to annex like the Donbass, let them. It's, you know, an economic problem. It's not like beneficiary to Putin. And if he annexes the Donbass region, then that like demographically will put the Ukrainian population as the majority of Ukraine for decades to come, if not forever. And so it's not like a move that would be particularly beneficial to Putin in Russia. I think he would prefer to have a state in Ukraine next door that's about a 50-50 split between Russia and Ukrainians, and that way it doesn't take a hard position towards Russia or the EU and presents a buffer between Moscow and the NATO border. But they seem to have no ability to understand that, are completely paranoid that, you know, Russia is going to invade Ukraine. That's why, you know, I'm concerned this week Biden is apparently telling the Ukrainian President Zelensky that we'll act decisively if Russia invades Ukraine. And, you know, while I mean, to me and you, that may mean sanctions, I don't know if Zelensky understands that message. He seems to be somewhat of a novice himself. And then,
boy, he better know better. That sounds, I mean, if I'm being reassured that by the American president, I'm not very reassured. That sounds to me like some weasel words. Oh, you'll act decisively, huh? You mind describing what you mean by that? You know?
Right. And I was just going to, so, you know, as I learned from you, personnel is policy here. And we do have Joe Biden, the old man. And, you know, these would be tedious negotiations, a lot of like detail and stuff. Like the call with Putin was what, 4 hours or 3 hours, they said. Can you imagine this guy sitting there? Can you imagine your grandpa sitting there for 4 hours and listening to one thing without falling asleep? It doesn't happen. And so Wendy Sherman, I believe, is leading the talks in Moscow. At least it's not Victoria Nuland, but that's not a whole lot better. You have, you know, Jake Sullivan and Blinken being like the two people probably closest to Biden, maybe Lloyd Austin. But right now he's confined with COVID. So, I mean, that's at least going to put Kathleen Hitz in a better position for the next couple of weeks and take Austin, who may be the man who's like most dedicated to Biden's worldview. At least that was some of the reporting from like Mark Perry before he passed away. Anyways, Scott, anything I guess on that, and just any final thoughts? We could wrap it up here with that, but yeah, just the people who are around Biden.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. It's a real problem that, you know, essentially Sullivan and Blinken and Sherman and all these people are just horrible. And they're so smug. I mean, that back to like the believing your own BS stuff. I think they're all so smug. Then again, right, like somebody made the call to have Biden say, we're not going to bring Ukraine into NATO. That was big. Now, he didn't put it in writing and swear forever, but he said, we're not, in 10 years, we're not going to invite him in. So in other words, if he's reelected, he's promising for beyond that too. That was pretty big. And they had a huddle and they decided that's what we're going to say. to me, that's already signaling that they really don't want to fight here. And I think you're right that Putin has a lot of reasons to not absorb the Donbass, such as he be skewing the balance in Ukraine in favor of the so-called ethnic Ukrainian or the Ukrainian nationalists, nationals and nationalists against the Russian-speaking population, which, he already took Crimea and got rid of a lot of pro-Russian votes right there, right? So why would he want to do that if he wants to keep, at least half the time have his guys win the elections in Ukraine, which has been, the tradition recently anyway. And then also, of course, the aging population, I believe you mentioned, and then they have this decrepit old industry there that, is essentially worthless and can't compete in the world market at all. And so, essentially he would be absorbing a bunch of pensioners that he can't afford and a bunch of industry that doesn't really produce. They do have some helicopter engines that are made there in the Donbass or in the east of Ukraine anyway, and a couple other things, but not much. And so, but that's the good news, right? So in other words, if the State Department is that paranoid, but their fear ain't coming, then at some point they got to recognize that, right? Like maybe they were lying about the troop buildup here, but a lot of them believed it, right? A lot of them just read it in the paper and said, oh no. But then now look at us. No invasion. It didn't happen. Never happens. They always said that back in 2014 and 15 too. Oh, the Russians are invading. Here it comes. And then they never came. And so, I think if Putin makes and he's got Sergei Lavrov, who is no slouch when it comes to dealing with these kooks either. So, if they make themselves very clear and say, these are our reasonable demands, no NATO, no missile launchers, and I don't know what, call your bomber practice off, whatever their demands are. I didn't read the whole list. I'm behind on this, but then I think the Americans ought to accept that, right? He's not saying you're going to let me occupy the eastern third of Ukraine, sign here, right? We're not talking about unreasonable, crazy stuff here. We're talking about completely reasonable, right? We're not talking about the Anschluss of Austria. We're talking about the Crimean Peninsula that they seized 5-6 years ago that belonged to them all along anyway. So just like with Iran's nuclear program, if the JCPOA falls apart, we still got the NPT. Right. I still don't see, right. So, and if they're not making nukes, then the Americans aren't going to start attacking them. And if the Americans don't start attacking them, they're not going to start making nukes. So we could just leave it at that. And so I think the same kind of thing here. You know what I mean? If the Russians get everything they want, so what? Everything's fine. The Americans don't really have to give up anything other than their position on their high horse, where they like to pretend that they're the good guy and that they did something, whatever. And then if the Russians call them weak, if the Republicans call them weak for backing down, well, then we got to attack the right from the right on that. I saw actually a great clip the other day of this guy, Richard Hanania, who writes for Defense Priorities. And he was on Tucker Carlson. And I think this was an old clip from last summer or something. And it was the Republicans ran an attack ad against Biden, calling him weak on Russia and saying that big bad Vladimir Putin is walking all over Biden because of Biden's weakness. And Tucker Carlson essentially played the clip and then essentially was like, what the F is this? And this guy Hanania was like, yeah, exactly. It's terrible. These Republicans are stuck in the Stone Age. That's not what Republicans think anymore. That's not what the America First, movement is about. Russia's no threat. And this should not be their message at all. This is terrible. So, a few more like that, and they're going to start getting it. You know what I mean? I saw, the GOP chairwoman had posted a thing on Twitter saying that too. But all the Republican comments in the responses were like, no, wrong. We don't care about that. Who wants that? Who wants the Republicans to go around echoing Hillary Clinton's Russiagate crap against Joe Biden? You know what I mean? And we had enough of that. It's the same thing with China, of course. All this stuff about China, backs Joe Biden, and Joe Biden is selling us out to China. What the hell kind of narrative is that, man? You know, Joe Biden's the senator from Delaware, aka the banks, always has been.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to think that he represents foreign interests at the expense of, no.
Right.
You know, American special interests? No way. You know, does he represent American special interests at the expense of the American people? Sure. But foreign interests at the expense of the American people? Nah, come on.
Right.
You know, Joe Biden's a China hawk, man. He was part of Obama's cabinet when they came up with the Pacific Pivot and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So people say, yeah, but he and his son had corrupt business deals in China. Yeah, so.
Right.
What does that mean?
Right. Yeah. Hunter's crack and hooker money doesn't drive the American foreign policy, even if, you know, that does get him a few bribes. I guess I'll just say that we have a great article coming out today at antiwar.com by Ted Carpenter that's highlighting that it's just not from the right, they'll hear, Scott, that it's the Democrats too. There's tons of them that want Joe Biden to be more aggressive on, I mean, various conflicts, like Menendez is crazy on Iran, and Adam Schiff is saying that if we don't sanction Russia, it's very likely that they're going to invade Ukraine. And he's got quotes from like 4 or 5 other Democratic congressmen who are just absolutely rabid on the issue.
Just think about that. If we don't sanction them, they're going to invade. Okay? If you just think about that for a minute. If they were going to invade, then obviously all the sanctions in the world wouldn't stop them from invading. They would have to be determined that, yeah, we're going to go ahead and have a war now. But they're going to be afraid. They're going to back down from Adam Schiff's new sanctions. Come on. The headline itself, the accusation, the whole frame of the reason why is self-refuting.
Yep.
You know, the whole thing is completely stupid.
All right, Scott.